Yes, Destination Newry, you're most welcome. It's the morning programme. I'm Ron, and I have the privilege of being your host, and I have the joy of welcoming James into studio, James McAreavey from the Newry Maritime Trust. And the reason for the visitation of James today is the Newry Docker project. And the Docker exists. If you haven't seen it yet, get yourself down there close to the quays and see the Docker. But just to whet your appetite, James, tell the folk what the Docker is about.
Well, Rowan, first of all, thanks for the invitation.
Very welcome.
It's a while since we've talked now.
Well, the door's always open to you.
And as you say, a very exciting project. We started out on this journey about, I suppose, almost 2 years ago now.
Yeah.
I had a chat one day with Eddie Curtis in the council about some other events that we were at, and I'd asked him about the possibility of getting some type of sculpture at the Albert Basin. And of course, he pointed out that that was beyond the council's remit with budgetary constraints.
But you weren't put off by that initial rebuffal.
Well, it was Eddie who pointed us in the direction of neighbourhood renewal.
Ah.
And I went to Sean McAveett, who's employed by Newry and Mourne Council in neighbourhood renewal, and he said if we had an alignment with the community association, we could make an application for funding to DSD.
Yes.
So
DSE?
DSD.
What is DSD?
Department of Social Development.
Ah, yes, okay.
Nelson McCausland.
So all the time you're expanding,
So
you're taking in more interested parties.
we then got Drumley and Quayside Close Association on board.
Yes.
They were very enthusiastic, and the application was lodged with DSD, and we finally were awarded, I think, something in the region of £68,000.
Yes.
The scheme was then managed in total by Newry and Mourne District Council.
Yeah.
And brought to completion on Saturday morning with the unveiling.
Unveiling. Hold the thought of unveiling. Andrew, if you could for a moment ask the people outside the door to be quiet. They've been picked up in here. I don't want it to happen. So that occurred last Saturday morning.
That was last Saturday morning, managed again by the council. Hilary Halliday, as usual, did an impeccable job running the event. And we had Tony Stallard, the artist, was
Where did
over.
you get the artist, by the way? Where did he come from?
Well, there was an actual open competition advertised in all the national press and local press, and then there was a short list of 6.
Yeah.
And he was the unanimous selection.
Where did Tony come from?
He comes from Chigwell in Essex.
So the Newry message went across the sea, and they were interested.
And yes, he won the competition, and the actual piece was then cast in Leatherhead in Middlesex, and local haulage firm Sure Freight brought it back. Prior to the unveiling.
James, it being done across the water, how did you supervise its progress?
Well, Tony Stallard kept in contact with Sean McAveett and Kathleen McGee, who's the community projects officer with the council.
Yes.
And with today's modern technology, Rowan, as you know,
you can see the images.
You can see the actual images, you know.
Yeah. It's what height is this fellow?
His standard height about 5'8", 5'9".
And he's on a plinth.
No,
that's the whole lot.
That's the whole
5'8",
point of the
5'9".
thing.
But then he's reaching up.
He's reaching up for a pulley. It could be a pulley of a ship. It could be off a crane, a derrick, whatever.
Yeah.
But the idea is he's an honest creator going about his endeavours.
Yeah. And it wasn't easy for them then.
It definitely was not. In fact, Rowan, there's one case in particular highlights it, and I spoke about it on Saturday. A very unfortunate man by the name of James Hughes.
James Hughes?
From Boat Street.
Yes.
And James lost his life tragically in April 1936. He was employed over at the steam packet shed, loading cobbles onto a ship
Yeah.
at 10 o'clock at night. Now, he had already completed a shift digging out coal from the same ship for 10 hours, went home and had a bite to eat, came back at 6 o'clock and commenced loading the granite sets.
How would he have done that? How would that early docker have loaded the granite sets?
Oh, horrific, Rowan. The inquest reports at the time quote the coroner as saying there was more attention paid to the safety of livestock
On
when they were
board.
being loaded rather than the men. They had to push the wheelbarrows up a plank filled with cobbles. Imagine that, a wheelbarrow full of cobbles, pushing it
Up a
uphill.
plank?
Up a plank. And the crater lost his balance at 10 o'clock at night and fell into the canal and was
Goodness,
drowned.
and he was drowned.
He left a widow and, wait for it, 14 children.
My goodness.
14 children.
14 children.
So, as you quite rightly say, the dockers endured incalculable hardship.
Absolutely.
You
The
know?
other one that I know that's close enough to my own family, Hugh Carroll. He was
Hugh
working.
Carroll was killed in 1937, loading, or
Watch your
sorry,
mic, you're pulling
sorry,
it tight. Just keep that loop loose, okay?
unloading a ship called the Marion at S.J. Lockington's.
Yes.
And the tragedy, the real tragedy about that was that his father, Paddy, was operating the steam winch, and they were lifting the tubs of coal out of the ship. Hugh was down in the hold with the rest of the dockers. Paddy was lifting the tub out, and the shout went up, "Stop, stop." A large lump of coal had fell out of the tub and struck Hugh in the head.
Of course, there would have been no safety helmets in those days.
No safety helmets. He was brought up to Newry General, which, as you know, was under a Thryland Road then.
Yeah.
And he died later that evening.
And the
he
word-
was a
the
young
word-
married
yeah.
man living in Mary Street.
Number 5, the house I was born in.
There you are.
And Nanny, my the old aunt who helped raise me,
Yes.
that was the news that was brought to her door.
Boys and boys.
And Archbishop Francis Carroll,
Brother.
son of a docker, he became the papal nuncio of Liberia and a great missionary of the SMA order throughout the world. So, you know, greatness and hard work and ordinariness all existed side by side in the heroic lives of these dockers.
There's a lovely story told about Francis Carroll and his ordination. The dockers had a nice story.
Yes.
Frank Fisher was the boss of Fisher's then, John Fisher's grandfather. And he died in 1951, and his house, Rockville, at Drumlane, was sold to the parish of McAreavey for the building of the new church. But Frank Fisher, Paddy Carroll, father of Francis Carroll, as you say, was a respected docker, had worked in the port all his life. And when Francis was getting ordained in 1936, seemingly it was the tradition then that priests who were going to be ordained supplied a chalice for the ceremony.
Yeah.
And the Carroll family didn't have the wherewithal to provide the chalice. So Paddy approached Frank Fisher and asked him if he would lend him £25 to purchase the chalice. Mr. Fisher said they would give him the money and they would enter into an arrangement to take so much a week back. So on the final week of the repayments, old Paddy went up to Mr. Fisher in the office, and he said, went in and told him, thanked him for initially for lending him the money, and he said, as you know, Mr. Fisher, I'm making the last repayment to you today. And Paddy, or Mr. Fisher, thanked him and inquired about his son. And Paddy said, well, he's been ordained now and he's gone off from Drummondine to Nigeria. And Mr. Fisher said, well, wish him all the best, Paddy, from me. And Paddy turned to leave and he said, just a second, Paddy, and opened the drawer, and he took out an envelope. He said, would you give that to your son? He said, with my regards. And the £25
My goodness.
was in the envelope.
Lovely story.
A lovely story, Rowan.
Beautiful story.
You know.
Beautiful story. Beautiful story. These men, there's photographs of them here, the Newry coal dockers, and there they are. Jim McAreavey's there. He was the stevedore.
Jim was there.
Tell us about Jim.
Jim was at the port all his life.
Yes.
Lived in Chapel Street. He was a stevedore over at the normally at the B&A side, and he would have been responsible for recruiting casual men and organising them into gangs, etc. He died a few years ago. He had a tremendous memory and a great knowledge of the workings of the port. He was about 93 when he died. But if you look at the shovels, Rowan...
That shovel is the width of a man. You know, it's a kind of a shield shovel.
Yes.
It's a pointed shovel. But I mean, the broad side of it is the width of a man's shoulders almost.
The shovel is a load on its own.
It is.
It weighs about 4 stone.
Gee whiz.
Ken Abraham from the museum brought one down on Saturday morning.
Gracious.
And people were lifting it and commenting on the weight of it. And to think that men wielded those in such awful conditions for 10 to 12 hours a day in all sorts of weather. And
these must have been strong men.
I'll tell you, they were supermen. They were supermen. And then when you look at the little man here,
Harry
Hollywood.
Commodore Captain Harry Hollywood.
MBE. And Harry started his career with fishers when he was 14 years old, around 1889, in the age of sail.
Yeah.
He worked with fishers until 1953, almost 64 years at sea.
Goodness gracious.
And retired when he was 78. He died a year later in 1954.
Goodness gracious.
But Harry Hollywood, I spoke to Captain Tom Ramsey, a Fathom man who is one of our members. He's retired now. And Tom worked for Esso Petroleum. And he was senior master with Esso when he retired. And he lives in Wallasey now. And I asked him one day, I said, what do you make of Captain Harry and those men of that era? And he said, well, he said, quite simply, I tip my hat to those men. He said, I don't know how they did what they did, but he said they did it. He said, all across Northwest Europe, Ireland, England, he said, with the very basic equipment, a magnetic compass and a poor chart. But he said they had the knowledge.
But the nature of the ships.
Oh yeah.
They were just buckets.
They were buckets.
And the weather, and the distance they had to travel. This took a toll.
Well, Mickey Fern is our oldest surviving Newry seafarer. Mickey is now well into his 91st year. And Mickey sailed with Harry Hollywood. And he said that not only was he an outstanding seaman, but he said his knowledge of local situations, ports, tides, all this sort of thing. But he said the one thing that he remembered about Harry was his dead reckoning. He said he was absolutely superb in fog with dead reckoning and had nerves of steel. He said flat out, and Harry, you'd look and he'd be standing with his watch, and he had everything worked out to the last, you know.
Why was it that the men of Fathom were like that? They were mighty men of the sea. What was it about Fathom that created these men? We're not talking one or two. We're talking a large number of Fathom people.
Well, John McParlin says that when he was a lad growing up, almost every house in Fathom had at least one seaman. Now in his house, his father and 3 brothers were seamen, and they all became merchant navy captains.
Yeah.
In Brian O'Keefe's house, 5 brothers went to sea,
My God.
and they all became captains.
What was it about Fathom?
Well, I think, Rowan, a lot of it had to do with the geographical location and the type of area it is. As you know, hilly, mountainous country doesn't lend itself to any sustainable occupation. It wouldn't be even good land for agriculture apart from sheep farming.
Yeah. But if they looked across the horizon, they saw the ocean and the canal that took the boats. The canal was their key to prosperity.
That's it. And it was, albeit a hard life, it was putting food on the table and rearing a family.
My goodness.
And as well as that, Rowan, I should point out to the viewers, the people, not only in Fathom, but in our area in general, as you well know, paid a high price. In 10 months between October December 1940 and October 1941, Newry lost the Privet and the Walnut. 18 men went to the bottom.
Goodness
and
gracious.
were never found. No traces of ships were found. And 6 of those men came from within a 2 square mile radius in Fathom.
My goodness.
Now, for a small area like that,
It's a big
to
loss.
lose 6 men in 10 months,
Big loss. Big
You know.
loss. And then we lost one of our own in the waters of the Bay of Biscay.
Raymond Kelly, that's right. We
Raymond Kelly.
spoke about that at length.
And you erected a plaque to Raymond down at the site of his home.
We put a plaque up at River Street, and there on the anniversary date, the 18th of March, we had an anniversary mass in Drumlane Chapel, and then we had a wreath laying ceremony at River Street, and there's we got Mickey Mallon to make a holder for the wreath, and it's in position
I see the wreath there. It's lovely.
under
It's lovely.
Raymond's plaque.
It's lovely. James, there's some part of your heart that drives you forward to do these commemorations. What is it?
Well, I think, Rowan, for so long, I mean, my own mother's brothers were seamen, and Desi Keenan was the last captain on the Dundalk before he went to the car ferries in Dublin. And I think it's so important. I mean, again, you know well, being a Newry man born and bred, you only have to scratch the surface, even now, to get the connections with the sea and the tradition that we had in Newry.
Yeah, but it's taken, if you don't mind me saying so, it's taken you and your organisation to come along, the Newry Maritime Association, to actually reopen the interest in the sea in Newry, in the docks and the sea.
Yeah.
You know, we are a maritime people, but we have hidden it. We've hidden it over the years until your lot came along.
Well, I think Rowan, it slipped off the radar with the port closing, and time went by. I mean, it's been 40 years now since the port closed, and virtually nothing had been done with the canal.
You know, it's amazing.
It was allowed to fall into further decay. But isn't it lovely now to see the public realm scheme
Yes, it's
coming
huge,
to fruition?
Huge.
And in fact, Rowan, that's something that is going to be coming up now towards the end of June, early July. There will be another sculpture
The Wave,
sited.
that's a huge edifice.
That's actually called Trading Place.
Yeah.
And it reflects the industries and trades that operated along the Newry Canal and the environs. A fella called Chris Wilson from Ballycastle.
He was in sitting there talking to me about it.
Chris
you know,
is
he's a good
doing
lad.
that.
Yeah.
And that will be unveiled sometime around the end of June, early July. And of course, we also have the wrought iron seat that Mickey and the blacksmiths made.
In
You
their
covered that
convention.
at the Forge Inn back in October.
I remember. Where does time go? Where does 40 years go? Because it only seems like yesterday that Jerry Rankin, who was the manager of the boats, would phone me and say, "Look, Rowan, can you come down? There's a boat in, and we think there's damage to the helm, something, blah, would you do it?" So we would dive underneath, and Jerry would pay us a modest amount of money, but then when we come out, the captain would insist on calling us up, and he would give us a bottle of vodka or a bottle of whiskey.
Which you didn't want, of course.
No, I refused it all the way. It's a diving health and safety thing. But that only seems like yesterday.
Yeah.
And then the time when the oil tank from the quarry was bulldozed into the canal by the army, and there was believed to have been a bomb on it. And I was summoned to do the dive, to do the inspection, and find out, was there a bomb? Didn't find any bomb, but I put the ropes, the slings, onto the thing to pull it out, because we had several boats locked into Newry, and we cleared the area then. But that only seems like yesterday. It's 40 years.
Well, I have a question for you. Do you remember, when you mentioned O'Rourke's, do you remember...
In the corner, a ship,
no,
a wreck.
Oh, that was the old
wee one.
Kittiwake.
Yeah, tiny wee thing. Yeah.
But do you remember on the wall, the boundary wall, that you'd look at from Dublin Bridge, and there was a sign on the wall written on it?
Got me there.
Do you not remember the orange wall with O'Rourke's Coal written on it?
O'Rourke's Coal.
On the island.
What I do remember there, maybe I'm going back further, I remember George Braham.
Oh yes,
of the
oil company.
Was that before O'Rourke's?
Sternall.
Yeah, that was before O'Rourke's. I remember that. But I also remember a thing. I was in my diving days as well. I remember driving across. My oldest daughter was in the car with me, Anne-Marie, and I saw a confusion going on down the middle bank, down towards O'Rourke's. And I drove down. I didn't have diving gear with me, but everybody said, "Rowan, Rowan." They knew I was a diver. They said, "Rowan, Rowan, he's just gone in, he's just gone in." It was a man in a post office van, and that man had gone in, and they thought, he's just down there. So I had this, as I sent the police to get my diving gear from my home, I thought, if I go down now without gear, I might just find this man. He's just below me. In immediately did a number of surface dives down, swept a wee bit on a lung full of air. Not a sign of the van anywhere. So after 20 minutes of that, I had to give that up. Got the stuff, and my uncle Pat and I, he was a diver as well, we did a sweep search of the basin and found the post office van, the red post office van, on its roof about 15, 20 metres out. And we had to jemmy open the back door of the van, jemmied it open, opened it up, and there we found the deceased person floating up on the floor of the van because it was upside down. We took him out, took him back, and we swam in with him between the two of us and handed him up to the people. The things that have occurred, full of tragedy, full of hope, and full of prosperity, all there in the one package.
Well, the reason that I mentioned O'Rourke's was that we're getting O'Rourke's name reinstated on that wall, O'Rourke's Coal, as a heritage project.
Yeah.
And it's another little piece in the jigsaw, of building a maritime brand in Newry.
You're going to be going on forever at this. This isn't going to go away.
Oh, it's
because
not going away.
You are changing the face of Newry in the projects.
Well, we're hoping to establish a maritime brand, Rowan, because the foundations for it have been laid by generations of men, and it's merely a matter of reawakening and raising the awareness of people to the treasures that we have. I mean, imagine if Banbridge or Cookstown or Armagh could lay claim to what we have. Yeah.
But you're doing it, and you're doing it with communities, and the importance of Newry's links with the sea are being revitalised by the Newry Maritime Society. Well done.
Well, thanks, Rowan, for giving us the opportunity.
Welcome anytime.
It's people like yourself that give voluntary groups such as ourselves the oxygen for publicity that we normally couldn't afford or couldn't buy.
That door that you see there is constantly open to you. Welcome.
Thank
God
you.
bless you.
Thank you very much,
Take care.
Rowan.
Music,
Good
sir,
morning.
please.